This was filmed during the COVID-19 pandemic. My guest is part of my inner circle for contact tracing. I was at an extremely low risk for contracting the virus. Please wear a mask in public or around others who are not part of your inner circle.
Hey everyone, it's Adaptive Goddess, and today I'm going to be talking about the DBT skill of Non-Judgmental Stance, and I'm going to be talking with my mom because Non-Judgmental Stance was really, really personal for me. So the mindfulness skill of Non-Judgmental Stance was the absolute hardest thing I have ever had to do in DBT, because it was so much about being in your own head, and I am a master at being in my own head. What was kind of for you before I did DBT and learned the non-judgmental stance? Like, how did you see me as like saying shit all the time? Did you ever see me get really stuck in a thinking trap?
Yeah, I mean, I experienced with you being stuck, and sometimes that was in an argument, or sometimes that was when I wanted you to do something, or I wanted you to explain something to me, and I could see you physically shutting down and being stuck. And in my head, I'm going should, and what am I doing wrong? And obviously you're doing a bunch of things wrong in my head. And I never understood what was going on with you until now, in these more recent years, when you're explaining some of this thought process and realizing how heavy the judgment got in our ways. Mm-hmm. And you then, even now, explaining how much judgment is in your own head, causing you to stop and to break down and in the relationship and break down communication, and how much that stopped us from being able to talk about things.
And yeah, that was like, for me, I think this was the aha moment in mindfulness, when you're learning the what skill or the how skill, or you're learning about the thinking traps. So you're like, yeah, that's all well and good, and I know they're important, but I think it was finally learning about non-judgmental stance that really, for me, the light bulb just went off. It clicked and the pieces fell together. And it was when someone really took the time to process non-judgmental stances, did the should statements that were my thinking trap kind of melt away.
Yeah, I'm still having a hard time with that, because I don't think I ever went through the kind of DBT training that you did. I know a lot on the peripheral, and I know what it's about. And I think I still struggle with that, because in my mind, I'm still should and what's wrong, and being very judgmental without thinking. I mean, I never thought I'm a judgmental person, but I think this is a little bit of something different, a different mindset of non-judgmental stance. I mean, I think you can still have judgment, but it's about how you're viewing yourself in relationship with yourself. But I'm still thinking it all the time, and I don't know how it really works. So I'm kind of excited to hear more about it.
Well, that's actually one of the things you brought up, is like, being non-judgmental doesn't mean you like technically stop judging. Because I mean, judgments are thoughts that we use to kind of categorize something as being good or bad, helpful or useless, ugly or beautiful. Like, I mean, we use judgments all the time. I mean, like, look at art, look at music. I mean, there's like a whole plethora of things, even just like performance arts. I mean, there's critics and food. I mean, anything that there's a critic, there's obviously judgment. I mean, look at Yelp and like Google reviews. I mean, those are all judgments that actually can be very, very helpful
like us videotaping and learning about videotaping.
Yes.
And oh no, you should be more like that, and you shouldn't look this way, and you shouldn't smile that way, and it gets really in your head. It's very confusing. But I think it's also good to have that judgment, like you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what we're talking about in DBT.
No, and that's kind of the problems with judgment come from the fact that they can distract from reality. They tend to really feed the negative emotions, and positive judgments are so fragile. I mean, like, think about a movie that, like, everyone loved, like Twilight. I know a lot of people loved it, and so there was positive judgment from just the vast majority of people who saw the film. And for me, like, I didn't like the film. I didn't really like the story behind it. And so for me, it would have been like bad. So it's like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I mean, Disney taught me that. And so a lot of what DBT comes in is this very negative view of non-judgmental, of being judgmental and of being kind of stuck in your head with the judgments, and learning to let go of judgments in of themselves so that you know whether or not there are actual helpful judgments that you should be following, or ones that you can just be like, I don't need them anymore. And there's actually like a step-by-step process that we had to do in DBT classes to really kind of focus ourselves and let go of them. But yeah, it's totally about just taking away the negative part of judgments and kind of trying to leave that positivity of them in, that helpfulness of them in, so that way you're not making bad choices for yourself and like going to a restaurant that's going to get you sick, or going to a flight, like going on a flight that's not going to be safe for you. And so it's kind of about that equal balance of judgment, because it's so good and so bad at the same time.
So you mentioned that judgments are useful, and explained that and how that works. And you also talked about how the negative judgments can stop you from making good choices or being stuck in a relationship. And so you talked about steps of how to go through it. And I would really like to know more about that, because I do get stuck in, oh, we should be doing this, or we should look this way, or it should be that way. And I think it stops me from making the choices and having the kind of richness in my life that I desire.
Yeah. So the first step to kind of letting go of judgments is you kind of need like a baseline of how many times you are judgmental, whether or not they're good or bad. You just notice that you're doing them and you keep count, whether it's you need to like tick them off, or you have like a little clicker, or like you're able to keep that many numbers in your head. I mean, the first time I counted, I got to like 20 and then kind of stopped because I was getting ashamed of myself for judging so much, which then adds more of that judgment into my counting.
Wait, you count every time you catch yourself judging?
Yes.
All day long?
Yes.
From like beginning to end?
Yes. And
wow.
You can do it very discreetly, so in your head, or you can like, I used to do it because I was doing a lot of these in school during like high school and college, that on like the side of my notebook, I would just notice if I was having a judgmental thought.
Wow, I didn't know you were doing that. My goodness. I don't know if I could do that during the day, like at work. Excuse me. I need to put this down.
and I mean, you don't have to make it like an announcement to the world. That's why I was like on the corner of my notebook. So it looked like I was taking notes, or it looked like I was doing something else, when I'm just like, these are my judgmental thoughts that I'm having. And when I got to college, I wasn't having so many, but I had gone through DBT, I think once or twice before getting to my aha moment with the non-judgmental stance. So I had been taking some of these steps before, so there weren't as many when I got to college.
Okay, so you start counting, and then when you have all that counting data.
So when you count and you're noticing your judgments, you kind of need to know, like, what am I judging? Am I judging a person? Am I judging like a place? Is this gonna be helpful to me, or is it gonna be hurting me? And I found that when it comes to like, if you're judging yourself, you're hurting yourself kind of no matter what the judgment is, even if it's about like, I should be thinner, or I should wear more makeup, or I should be waking up earlier. All of those are the should thinking traps that you can really get yourself stuck in, because now you're judging yourself, and those will just only hurt you. They're never really helpful.
Okay.
Whereas if you're judging like a really bad seafood place, that's more of a helpful judgment, where you're like, oh, this food's gross.
But what if it's a helpful judgment of me telling you you should do something? Am I being helpful then?
I think a lot of that then gets into kind of a gray area. Because yeah, you're being helpful, but in the long run, is it hurting? So you kind of have to think about like how you as the person, if you want to give a judgment to someone else, like how would you as the person receiving that judgment feel about that judgment? And if you're like, oh, I would like, it would hurt, then that's a hurtful judgment. So you kind of have to put yourself in the other person's shoes and see things from their perspective before putting judgment on other people.
Okay.
And then you replace judgments. So we have judgments often to either describe, to give preference, or to give consequence. And so what you do is you take those judgments and you replace them with statements. So like a statement of preference would be like, I like, or I prefer. Statements of consequence is, this is helpful or this is harmful for whatever it is. And then statements of facts would be like, this happened this way at this time because of blah, 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 blah. So this is all very like what you think and what you feel and what you kind of need in the moment.
So I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around all of this that you're talking about. And so when I'm telling you you should do something, I think I'm being helpful, like you should call me much more often. I remember that was a thought while you were in college. And you should be picking up the phone and you should be texting me back and you shouldn't be waiting for days on end to let me know that you're still alive.
Yes.
And instead you're saying it would have been more helpful or a lot more effective if I would have said instead, I really like when you respond to my texts. It makes me feel more at ease to know that you're doing okay. Or like a consequence one would be more like, when you don't call me back, then it gives me a lot of anxiety, and to help me through that, it would be helpful for you to, would you be willing to at least call me once a week or respond to my text once a week?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah, that's totally a much more neutral, if not a more positive slant to kind of the person and to the situation. Because if you always think of like, you should,
which you should as the child of college.
Yes. But when you think of the shoulds, you get really wrapped up in that negativity.
Yeah, and I felt pretty yucky about you not calling back.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's just I can see how that leads to just more and more and more, instead of, I mean, even for me now saying, I really like hearing from you at least once a week. That feels so much better now, even saying it, than it should.
And it's easier to kind of like accommodate that and be like, yeah, I can definitely do once a week, versus like, well, you should do this. And it's like, well, I'm 18, I'm an adult, I shouldn't do anything. Like, right. You see that kind of, that pushback.
That's the
yes.
That's the should of the should.
Yes.
Got it. So I'm replacing it. Okay. That makes sense.
And then The next part is definitely one of, I think, the more difficult parts, because it's practicing accepting what is, which is that radical acceptance, which I will get to in a later video as it comes up later in DBT training, but it's kind of introduced now. So you kind of accept what is and you let go of the judgment. So you kind of don't let it get in your way, and you kind of let it, like if it was on a conveyor belt, you just kind of let it pass without picking it up to examine it. You kind of just forget it's on there.
Oh, that's hard.
It is.
And I do recognize that you started learning it a lot more deeply in the last few years, even than me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I am still very stuck in this judgmental thinking and expressing, and then picking up the cues from you, even now, just talking to you, how it can function differently, and in our relationship, but just in your own way of seeing the world.
Yeah,
frees you up so much more to thinking about other things besides what somebody should be doing, or what I should be doing or not should be doing.
Yeah, and it frees your brain up more to really focus on other things that you like to do than just like focusing on that judgment and on that negativity. And then the last step is, I think, always the hardest step with anything, and that is to not judge your judging. Because then it's just a vicious cycle of judgment and judgment and judgment and judgment that then kind of negates the whole reason why you're doing this.
And that must be more of that radical acceptance.
Yes.
bit, which sounds really hard.
It is. And that's why it's kind of brought up later in DBT. It's actually taught in between distress tolerance and emotional regulation, because it kind of lends a bridgeway to both. But it's brought up here in this kind of just accept the way things are without a lot of explanation, which is why the first time you go through non-judgmental stance, it can be really, really difficult, because you've yet to learn these things of radical acceptance, and you tend to learn these things of like the how skills and the what skills before you're even kind of taught just how do you let go and just accept that this is the preference, or this is the consequence, or the fact of the situation.
Yeah, and I can see how what you were saying earlier in this video is that it was a really hard step for you to learn this practice, the non-judgmental stance, and that you would want to bring another person in to talk about it, because it does seem to be a more of a two-person or more people involved in practicing it than just yourself, or learning. This is kind of more of a doing part of this.
Yes.
Than really a just practice, even though, I mean, I get it. You're supposed to just do it yourself, but you're really bringing it to your relationships and the outside world. So mulling it over and understanding it, how it really works, has been really helpful.
Yeah. And that's kind of one of the things with mindfulness itself. It's a lot of people say it's kind of the more like know yourself and the more personal side of DBT. But I feel like non-judgmental stance is one of those that you really need to communicate with other people. That way, if you find yourself getting stuck in a judgment, there can be someone to kind of pull you out of it and help you work through it. Because that's actually what happened to me a lot, was that I would get stuck in my cycle of judging, and I wouldn't be able to communicate with you or to Dad or to anyone that this is what I was doing. And I couldn't even see it myself that I'm stuck in the cycle, because you really can't see yourself in the judgment cycle when you're in it, but you can see from the outside that someone's in this cycle.
Well, it's not working.
Yeah.
You realize something's not working.
Yeah. And like, I find that this is actually one of the more important mindfulness skills that ever gets taught, because it helps you bring your focus back to the things you want to focus on, whether it's painting or fan fiction writing, which I love, or
shooting this video.
Yeah, or
doing
even
a video at all.
Yeah, or playing a video game, or like taking the time to be with yourself and kind of having your self-reflective time. The judgments get into the way of even that, and then you're now focusing on your judgmenting instead of just being one with yourself and in your spa moment.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed that it's totally working for you because of how engaged you are in a bunch of things, and you're not letting the should statements or the judgments get so busy in you that you're kind of stuck and not doing anything. You're doing lots of things. So it's a huge change that I've seen in you. And
that's even one of the things is like, yeah, I mean, I still have judgments about myself a lot. And like, that's one of the things now is that I don't let them define who I am. And that took a lot of just kind of some self-reflecting of like the person I want to be and kind of how happy do I want to be in life. And what's so great about the non-judgmental stance is that it helps you to think in a more neutral, if not positive light, and not really dwell in the negative. So you're more uplifted when you're either talking to people or you're thinking about yourself than you are if you're thinking about your should statements or you're taking things personally. Like, this really does help with even getting out of the thinking traps, because you're just kind of letting that thought go and you're letting that trap kind of just release itself. And I remember I used this skill so much more on getting myself out of those thinking traps, because I would have to use words like I prefer, or this is kind of my consequence, or this is the way the situation is, instead of just like, oh man, that receptionist totally was rude to me. Like, what did I do? She should have
been so much more friendly.
Or like, what did I do wrong? Like, I didn't do anything wrong. Why was she so mad? Like, and taking things either personally or using the should statement, or even like having a mental filter on things in terms of just a conversation I'm having with you. That was because I'm stuck in a judgment and all that's coming in are the parts of a conversation. So when you ask me like, what was I talking about? I'm like, point A, point C, and point Z. And you're like, no, that's not really what I was saying. But that's the part my brain was intaking while trying to focus on a judgment. So, which is why I think the non-judgmental stance and skill is so important to just being mindful with yourself and being mindful with others, or just even in the broader community.
Totally agree.
So comment down below, what is your favorite show that has a judge in it? I think either like MasterChef, anything where Gordon Ramsay's a judge, I really like.
Interesting.
And where it's food and cooking, I think MasterChef Junior is actually my favorite because they're all just so sweet. I think that's my favorite judgy show.
I think I really, now that you got me thinking about judgy shows. At first I was just thinking Judge Judy, but actually, ice skating is judged, and it's always very interesting. First of all, I love watching ice skating, but it's also that, what did that judge think, and so forth. So yeah, I really like ice skating, and maybe part of the reason I like it is because it's judged.
Well, that's the thing. I think in our culture as like humans, we like to be judged. We put ourselves out there to be judged. I also remember shows like American Idol being really popular and
Yeah.
X Factor. I mean, I love watching
Right.
the like bad contestants
Yeah.
just because of just how absurd the judges are and just
Right.
that whole
Their
dynamic.
expectations.
Yeah. So yeah, comment below your favorite show where there's a judge. So that's it for the video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and gently tap that like button. And remember to be kind, compassionate, and true to you.